So welcome and thank you very much. I'm really excited about this panel. We have some great panelists. And I know on the program we were expecting to have Chuck Harris, but he's not able to join us this morning. And so we have a special guest that will join us, mystery guest, who we'll introduce last. So first joining me on stage, of course, is my co-founder, Travis Oliphant. Come up, Travis. CEO OpenTeams, founder Quansight and OpenTeams, and of course, Anaconda. Welcome. You want to have a seat over there at the end and grab the microphone. Our next panelist is Leah Silen, of course, director of NumFOCUS, longtime founding director, right? So thank you, Leah. Welcome. So our next panelist, our next panelist is Tom Caswell. Where are you, Tom? There's Tom. So Tom is the project lead for possibly the world's most popular charting software, but at least one of the world's most popular pieces of software, Matplotlib. Thank you, Tom. And then our last panelist, drum roll. All the way from, actually, are you from France? Did you fly here from France? I don't even know. Okay, Matthias Bussonnier. All right. Welcome, Matthias. So longtime open source contributor on many projects, including, of course, the very popular and beloved Jupyter project. So welcome, all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. And we got a little bit of a late start today. I think everyone had maybe too good of a time last night. But we're going to try to run this pretty quick. But I wanted to get everyone's different perspectives. Yesterday, Travis, Leah, and I had a lot of stage time talking about the history of NumFOCUS, PyData, Anaconda, and all that. But today, I think in this panel, what I wanted to get from each of you was a quick sort of a recap on what the last 10 years, even more, has felt like, what your personal journey has been through that, and then we'll have a conversation about kind of what comes next and what the future looks like. So if we want to, actually, maybe we start with you, Matthias, and we'll go this way. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about kind of your journey through open source and kind of as you watch the projects evolve that you've worked on and all that stuff.
Yeah, so my journey to open source started slightly over 10 years ago, like really contributing to open source. I was starting my PhD and I had the choice of either doing MATLAB in German or using a real programming language with package management. And so that became basically a known choice. And I still remember like one of my first SciPy 10 years ago, so in 2012, where continuum analytics was still like something that was going to be announced. And arriving to SciPy, going to tutorials where we were exchanging USB keys with the installer for Windows on some keys, for Macs on others, and you had to get compilers on your machine, and it was something like quite difficult to get the scientific Python stack installed. And you had no CI, you had to basically figure out how to run the test on your machine when you were a developer, and GitHub was barely getting started. Like Python became, like the scientific Python became a real family for me because people were helping each other, and it's still the case now. But now, basically, you can tether from your phone and download several gigabytes of installers and get things across machine and even directly by script in your browser. And you have numerical computing at your fingertips. And so it has changed dramatically in 10 years. And I'm wondering, like, where will it be in 10 years with all the changes it has done in the last 10?
Mm-hmm. Hopefully the rate of change increases in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, good changes. Not changing too fast. I don't want for us to become JavaScript, because if you change,
said it, not me. All right.
If you change framework every 3 months,
mm-hmm.
It's difficult to build something which is strong. And I respect how JavaScript became what it is, and all the challenges and the technical difficulties they had to overcome. And I think we can learn from that and have an even stronger ecosystem.
That's great. Tom?
So my start with open source is very similar. I was a grad student wanting to move away from MATLAB, and I found Python and started working in it. I think for me, the biggest change over the last 10 years has been, we were talking about the importance of professionalizing these projects and getting moving away from just like, pirate hours from grad students and postdocs getting this work done to being, supported developers managing projects as actual software projects, not as like hobbies. And I think we've made a lot of progress over the last 10 years. We're not all the way there yet, but things are definitely getting better in that way. And I think looking forward to the next 10 years, I think moving to all the projects having, a core team of a handful of professional software developers is where we need to keep going towards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a hard question because I can think of a lot of changes that I've noticed. But I think one kind of, I guess, echoing what you just said, Tom, was the change in projects. When NumFOCUS first started and we first, started the fiscal sponsorship program, we were, IPython was one of the first projects that came on because, Fernando was on the board and they had an opportunity for funding. And bringing that funding in, that was, trying to create that vehicle and having those accounts set up and the management around that and legal support and all of that was crucial. But as more projects came on and as projects started to get funding and we saw projects move along on their growth cycle, then the needs for additional services also came up, and supporting that internal contributor community around the project leads, maintainers, supporting their governance and making sure that we could provide services that would help them so that they could function better, internally with their own project governance. And we've put a lot of processes and systems in place to help with that. We're always trying to do more, but I think just seeing that greater need, getting funding is extremely important, but also making sure that the support is in line and is there as that funding is implemented throughout the project.
Yeah, it's sort of been my the second decade, the past 10 years. So I sometimes kind of a lot of things blend together. But I would say one common thread has been people begin by scratching their itch in this community. Right. There's been a lot of people who have built software because they care about that software. Right. So it's kind of the opposite of professional software engineers. It's people who they have another interest, and they come and they start to write code to fulfill that other interest. It certainly was my experience. It has some very strong pros, but then also some challenges, because those other interests mean you're being drawn away to something else besides actually making the code better and stronger. So I think definitely the past 10 years have felt to me like, let's take the initial energy of creation around things that were scratching an itch for people, and then put systems and funding mechanisms and sustainability approaches around it. At the same time, new projects have been started. So this cycle continues, and I guess the goal would be, can we accelerate that cycle from creation to maintenance to full support, but do it in a way that maintains the community-driven spirit, the community-driven perspective, as opposed to just getting captured by one particular organization that hires all the developers, which has been a constant challenge, actually, throughout the history of the past 20 years, because there's some valuable people that have written all great software. How do we make it so that when they work, they're not just supporting one company agenda, but many agendas? But that's a challenge, because you've got to have sustaining income to work, and that's got to be in support of a business goal. So I look forward to the next decade of, I think we'll continue to accelerate and improve, and some of the business models that work are being established and clarified, and some of the companies that are working will emerge and continue to grow, like Anaconda.
Yeah, thank you. No, and I think that's a really good point, that as I think about when actually so Travis and Tom and Matthias, all of you, when you started with your projects, you were all either grad students or researchers. You were in academia, right? And then you found that making the better tools for science was something that you were pretty passionate about. It's a great way to have impact. And I think about now someone getting started. They go in an ecosystem, this ecosystem that we've all helped build. It's already all there. The funding mechanisms, I think about like the concert last night, great bands, but the musicians come out and play, but it's all the sound people, the AV people, the lighting people, the road crew that moves all the equipment around. They're kind of invisible in the background to make all that possible. And as Leah, as I hear you talking about administrating grants and helping people, just all of the politics and all the legal stuff and all these other kinds of things that your standard grad student writing some code to push to GitHub has no understanding of how to do. And so now all this infrastructure exists. People coming into the current world have a lot of this infrastructure. Do you feel like in a world now where someone can start an open source project, to get some adoption, and then they have VCs calling them up, right? No VCs were giving you guys any calls that I know of. And so what do you think that change looks like, and how does an open source community values forward ecosystem like ours, how do we preserve that core of it, while of course not keeping people from going and getting economic benefit from the fruits of their labor, right? So what do you guys have, what are your thoughts on that? Anyone want to volunteer to go first?
So I think with the ecosystem today, it's actually much harder to figure out what to do, because like when I started 10 years ago, I could do like survey the full landscape of the Python ecosystem in a couple of weeks. I know, even if I was new to it. Obviously, we can see that here. We all look the same, so there is some diversity issues, and I had the possibility to spend time to learn Python, which not everybody had the time to do. But nowadays, even as a full-time open source maintainer, I don't know everything which is happening. And I would really love to figure out a way to make Python for newcomers more uniform and more like, a distribution. Like you still have a lot of people who are more interested in using something like Mathematica or Maple because everything is there already.
It's an opinionated platform.
Yeah,
right?
It's opinionated, and they don't have to learn that there is this library for numerical computation and this library for GPUs. And I think there is something that we can do here to have Python be more uniform, and for novices not having to worry about understanding the difference between the language and the libraries. Even if, as a maintainer, you care that someone makes a distinction, but if it's someone who wants to do research or who wants to do data science, and they have to understand the idiosyncrasies of this is pandas, this is Dask, this is Matplotlib, it's some extra information they need to process before moving forward.
That's true. Yeah, all business is bundling or unbundling, right? And so our open ecosystem unbundled a bunch of stuff that was bundled together in those opinionated platforms. And now we suffer the other side of it, in a sense, where people have to choose what, of these 50 libraries, which one do I use to do this thing? And also, I guess to some extent, our community is very, people are relatively humble to say, well, here's my thing I've built. I'm not going to say it's better than the other person's thing, but that is a challenge for us, for sure. Tom, look like you have something to say.
So I definitely agree. Having a common opinionated platform to get new people in easily and make it, but we need to make sure it's very easy to extend that opinionated platform with your new tool. Because I think, Travis said, like, although my initial comments were about the professionalization of like the core projects, and as projects mature, they're not, you need to think about how you actually support the users. The solving your own itch or scratching your own itch is an absolutely critical thing to get new projects, right? Like I don't know every application of Matplotlib. I need people who are actually out in the field, doing the, at the coalface, to mix metaphors terribly, like doing the work to understand what they need. And I think as the core project, it's our job to make sure those people can build the, domain-specific tools as easily and quickly as they can to get what they need done for whatever reason they're writing the software, right? Very few people write software just for fun. You're doing it to solve some other problem that you actually care about.
Leah or Travis, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say I have a couple things to add on to multiple points, but I think making sure, I guess going back to something that Travis, you said about making sure a company wasn't, control of a project, influence wasn't all coming from one company. I think one thing that we work hard and all NumFOCUS projects have in common is that we work really hard to make sure that the project leads are distributed and that they're not all concentrated in one entity, whether that's a university or whether that's a for-profit entity or some other group. We want to make sure that that's well distributed. So there's a diversity of perspectives, a diversity of ideas for where the project needs to go. We can make sure the roadmap is meeting the needs of a wide variety of users. But I think, Tom, what you were talking about, that communication, that's something that we hear a lot, and the projects need to get feedback from users. And I think events are a good way to, by attending events, that's one way to help that, project maintainer user communication, keep those lines of communication open. But just trying to do that on multiple levels is, I think, something that there's still space to work on. And I know, we're getting ready to launch a new project for the research side on that to make sure that that communication is going on through those who are doing scientific research. Some of them may be contributors, but also making sure that those lines of collaboration and communication are open with the projects themselves.
I'll just comment on 2 points. One, long wanted to figure out how to pay people to work on maintaining open source. That's been a drive of reason to start Anaconda, the reason to start Quansight. Building off of the work we did at Anaconda to build community innovation and kind of open source research. Been able to build Quansight Labs as an affiliate of NumFOCUS and as a place to really hire people to work on open source. To the degree we can get sponsorship and support from industry to do so. Really grateful that, because there we can also start to do some things that are to help. We also see that you mentioned diversity, and there is there's been a lack of diversity in the core tools, which I think stems from a lot of reasons. We can debate why, but certainly it comes down to people follow who they see, right? And so I think to improve diversity, you have to recruit and get contributors and participants who are a little different, and that was a struggle early, and I think we've been making a lot of strides. We still have a long way to go, but we've making a lot of strides, and I think that's something we'll continue to do. And I think that's a area for intentionality where there's it can be a challenge, because in that intentionality you want to ensure that people still feel very secure that it's their contributions that are making them stand out. But there's definitely things you can do to recruit. There's definitely things you can do to sponsor, to promote, to create internship programs that are helping. So I think I look forward to that.
Yes, definitely.
I think that's one of the key values that emerges from sustainable funding, and not just allowing the kind of the accidental topology of distribution of wealth or distribution of opportunity to drive open source or community participation, which has been the case in the past.
Right, and there's a lot to build on there and talk about for sure. I mean, one of the things that I have 2 things as well. One of them, I remember there was one SciPy that we went to when SciPy was held in Pasadena back in the 2000s, and it was actually kind of like horribly embarrassing. I think when people looked around the room and realized, I think there were like 2 women in a room of 100 people, and so there was like a bit of a conversation like, holy crap, we got to do something about this, right? And then the Python community in general, I think, around the same time really started talking more about at least gender diversity in technology and what do we do about this. And it was, I think, really foundational that all of the core developers, who were all dudes, right? At that time, I think it was all dudes, and all sort of got together and said, no, we have to make this a first-class concern. We have to address this issue. And since that time, you have PyLadies, you have all these other kinds of organizations who've come around to really promote at least one dimension of diversity within our ecosystem, and we've always tried to be very welcoming and open to that. And then related to that, from a geographic cultural diversity perspective, what struck me when I first got involved in open source in the scientific Python ecosystem was how many really neat people, smart people, came from all over the world, right? And doing foundationally important work. And so it just really drove home the point that the reason why certain voices are underrepresented is simply we're not doing the work to connect and make it easy for them to show up. And if we were to do that, and so with PyData being so distributed, like that map of all the meetups is one of the things I'm most proud of. And I've spoken to PyData in London, not London, in Japan, in India, virtually presented in Taiwan, and just, I know you've been all over the place, Travis. Like, we've tried to do these things all over the world to really make this into a global transformation. So in our few remaining minutes, I want you all to kind of think about, okay, moving forward, we want to have some opinionated starting points for people so they know how to kind of get started, but then not make it so they're walled in to some walled garden. So the other thing is then, how do we increase diversity, increase the outreach to all these folks, and give them the opportunity to build modular things that other people can build on top of, right? And for sustainable funding and new businesses that are rooted in these values, and then, but still able to make money, able to sustain and not be based on pirating volunteer hours from people who have families and other things they have to do. Those are some of the key themes I've heard so far. Do you guys want to speak to that at all, or anything else beyond that?
So I think, so an earlier panel, I think with Wes and Travis, someone commented that the open source stack was built on the ashes of academic careers. And I think one of the biggest change, so I think that contributes to some of the diversity problems, because it is not a path to academic success, right? If you're a grad student or a postdoc, and you look at what the people who are doing software have done, like, they all burn out of academia in some successful, some dramatic ways. I think that there's now a career path as a open source developer is extremely good. I think we're still figuring out what exactly that looks like, but I'm very hopeful with where that's going.
Cool.
I want to re-emphasize that there are financial sponsorship for students to come to many SciPy, and there is Euro SciPy at the end of August. Personally, my first SciPy was sponsored, and if I hadn't been there in person, I maybe have not stayed all that long, and I found my family by coming to a conference and meeting people. And so I think there is still, in-person events have a huge contribution to retaining and learning, and helped me push my PhD and where I am now. So I hope we can push that even more.
Good point. Good point. Any thoughts? Travis, Leah, you want to conclude with some final parting thoughts on what NumFOCUS is doing in particular, right, to help push this forward?
Yeah, definitely. We are in our second year of a contributor diversification research program that our developer advocate, Arliss Collins, is heading up, and she's been working with projects on this. I should definitely say that's funded by the Moore Foundation. And we are going to come up with some best practices, and we're actually going to, we're definitely going to publicly disseminate all of this knowledge that we've gained, and we hope to even continue it further, because I think as we've gotten this much into it, we're learning things that we need to take a step further, and are partnering with the University of Toronto and some work they're doing in that area. But it's interesting that every project wants to be more diverse, especially when we're talking about the maintainer level. There's not a project that's like trying to not make that happen. And we've been, and I think, projects should be, they're like actively working on it, but it's not easy. It's hard to do. There's a lot of mentorship and one-on-one work that has to happen. Someone doesn't just decide to be a maintainer and pop in and make that happen. So I think making sure there's open contributor guidelines, where a contributor can start, make sure the door is wide open for new contributors for each project, make sure that's clear. There's a lot of opportunities that we're also, you spoke about geographic diversity, and I think that is one thing that has come, one positive outcome of COVID and all the online events. We've had the PyData global events, and they pretty much are occurring around the clock to make sure, every region has access to keynotes and has access to tutorials and the type of content, educational content that is so important. And then also including at those events, workshops on how to contribute to a project. How can you team up with projects to make sure projects have funding and resources available to have, hackathons and sprints. Those we've seen, huge progress on that with Pandas and the work they're doing in that area that Mark's been doing. So there's too many folks to name that are just having great programs out there for this, but it's just keeping it going and keeping that thread running through and making sure the education is happening and the efforts are continuing.
That's fantastic. And I promise to give you the final thing, but just as you're talking about that, something that occurred to me was that we are, I will say one last thing, which is that the community that we've built around the scientific Pi, and of course the SciPy conference, right, is happening also right now throughout the rest of the week here just up the street. The scientific Python community, which gave rise, the ashes or the carbon that fueled the fossil fuel economy of AI and ML, there's a broken metaphor there somewhere, but all the academic careers that carbonized, right? But there's a center of values here, right? Sustainable open source, and then the diversity aspects that we've been working so hard on. All of these things, there's a center of values that you get when you're in person, that you get when you actually meet the people and you find, okay, these are really good people. They're not just trying to check some box on something or whatever. They really genuinely care. I think we do it because we like it. We do it because we want to do it. And I think it's really important that in the next 10 years, we continue to actually be maybe not an economic leader, but a values leader in what the underpinnings of computational science should look like and numerical computation. And so much of the data analysis and insights people pull from data, it comes from asking better questions. And those questions and all that ideation, that's in the minds of every single person on Earth. And it's going to be indigenous to their area, to their culture, to their problems. I learned so much actually going to India and being at PyData and PyCon India and the kinds of ways they're approaching problems, the specific problems they have there. And it was just mind-blowing to me. I was like, yeah, no, you can only do this work here in India working on your problem, on your data problems, in your particular cultural context. So on that note, thank you all very much. Panelists, give them all a big round of applause. Thank you all so much for all you've done.